Gary Williams here. Some friends of mine are making a difference in the community, and one of the ways they're doing that is helping to sponsor this podcast. Petrocelli Homes Realty Group is a boutique brokerage service located in downtown Niles. They offer a personal and intentional touch to the home buying and selling market. They take the time to learn each client's story, much like this podcast, because to them, the first step in linking buyers to the home of their dreams starts with understanding and a great deal of trust. John and Jennifer Petrocelli have had the honor of helping countless buyers and sellers make effective real estate decisions to plant their roots, raise their families, expand their wealth, or simply relax and retire. So if what I've described is what you might be looking for in a realtor, I suggest getting in touch with Petrocelli Homes on Niles Boulevard in downtown Niles. Now, coming to you straight from Fremont, California, this is the Fremont Podcast, dedicated to telling the stories of the past and present of the people and places of the city of Fremont, one conversation at a time. Now, here's your host, Ricky B.
Hello, Fremont. You're listening to episode number 19 of the Fremont Podcast. I am so glad that you are joining me again this week for another episode of the Fremont Podcast. It truly is a joy to be able to share these conversations with you, and I hope that you are finding them to be beneficial. If you are, I'd just like to ask you to maybe take a moment to share an episode with a friend through your social media, or go to wherever it is that you listen to podcasts and leave a review. Leave a 5-star rating and a kind review so that other people can know that this is a place where they can find good conversations. Well, today in this week's episode, I have with me Jeannine Rashidi, who is a counselor, she's a therapist, and she is the author of a best-selling book called Abundance Beyond Trauma. It is my privilege to have her with me today on this episode. She lives right here in Fremont. And if you are somebody who deals with trauma from past events, past experiences in your life, then this is a conversation that I think will be helpful for you. And even more than that, Jeannine is offering a giveaway through our podcast. She wants to give somebody an opportunity to be able to have a session with her and to be able to receive her book and the workbook that goes with it so that they can benefit, so that you can benefit from the work that she has done. So listen to this episode. You'll find out more about the giveaway later on, and you can also find out about the giveaway through following the Fremont Podcast social media. So you'll want to do that as well. But here is my conversation with Jeannine Rashidi. Well, it is a privilege to have a new friend of mine on the podcast, Jeannine. She is the author of a bestseller. And when I first met Jeannine, she was not finished with authoring this particular book yet, this bestseller, but we were standing in line at Devout Coffee in Niles, and I some reason I think it was a rainy day, but maybe it wasn't. I can't remember. It was a cold day.
It was definitely overcast.
It was
I
overcast,
remember that, yeah.
But we started chatting, and we just asked what each other or what we're doing with our lives. And she was telling me that she's a therapist. She was working on a project, writing this book. And that was a few years ago. And then fast forward to now, and now the book is completed. It's been on the bestseller list, and I'm excited. She lives right here in Fremont. So I was excited to be able to have Jeannine. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Ricky. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to just kind of give, a pointer into the direction that we're going. I want to hear about you, what brought you to Fremont, and then I also want to kind of dive into your book, because your book has been quite fascinating. I didn't know what it was going to be about, but it's kind of like this hybrid kind of autobiography / self-help therapy sort of book, and it's quite fascinating. You have quite an incredible story, and it's and even as you being the author who read the audiobook, I could hear it in your voice that you were telling your own story, and it was quite amazing. So I'm excited to talk about that a little bit. So first of all, let's talk about what brought you to Fremont, or how long have you been here, and what brought you here, and what's your story?
So we moved here in 2015, and we were trying to buy a home.
Okay.
And we were getting pushed out of the market, actually. So
you were trying to buy a home here?
Anywhere in the area.
Okay.
So we checked out homes here, and it fit our budget, but we also really liked the atmosphere, the energy of Fremont. Love Niles, love Devout. From my home, I can walk out and walk Quarry Lakes. We can go to Lake Elizabeth. There's so much nature here. So it's very different than like where my office is, which is more like Santa Clara, San Jose area.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you moved into Fremont, I guess that's about seven, maybe close to 8 years ago.
Right.
And then you've been living in this area ever since. I think the listeners need to know the rest of your story, but we don't have time for the rest of your story because you tell so much of it in the book. And I do think that if people really want to get a good understanding of your story and why I'm having you on the podcast today, I think they need to find your book and read it because it's so interesting and fascinating. So tell me a little bit about, maybe in a nutshell, we can't hear your whole story, but tell me in a nutshell, what is the journey that you've been on that brought you to the point where you wrote the book, and then what really captivated you or motivated you to write the book?
So the name of the book is Abundance Beyond Trauma. And when COVID happened, I found myself in a position where I could not physically see clients. So my thought was, how am I going to make some income? And when I started looking at, different platforms of online work, not everybody was interested in doing online work. And, through trying to figure that out, what I noticed was people who were successful in it were authors. But I wasn't certain, if that's the journey I was meant to be on. Mm-hmm. Well, then during COVID, I was asked to be on different podcasts and webinars, and I was asked to speak about whatever I wanted. And so I decided I would talk about going from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, to becoming an Ayurvedic doctor and what that journey has been like.
Wow.
So, at the age of 25 was when I was fully out of the deep, intense traumatic experiences that created post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. And at the same time that I came out of those experiences, I found myself as a single parent, and I needed to create a life where I could be the mom that I wanted to. So the typical 9-to-5 wasn't going to work, even though I was in corporate America. And so I created my own practice, Goodbye Tension, which has been now 19 years.
Wow.
And that's where I started my health and wellness, journey as far as healing myself, but also opening it up to others.
Wow. Can you go back real quick? I don't want to derail you, but can you go back and just maybe give us a brief synopsis of what that first 25 years was like? Because, so many stories that you told in the book, it was captivating. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I'm just imagining myself in those situations. And I think it's important for people to understand you're talking about the journey that brought you to where you could provide therapy for, trauma. And I think people just need to know a little bit of the story that brought you to where you are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my parents, they unfortunately are addicts. And they were not appropriate at all with myself or, siblings as well. So unfortunately, what happened was I was raised in many different types of abuse: sexual, physical, mental, emotional, psychological, with both parents. And I was a straight A student destined, to get a scholarship for medical school, which was really the route I was going. But when I got into high school, I was looking for classes that would help me deal with what was going on at home, and there were no classes. And even though I was a sophomore before I made the decision to run away, the idea of staying 3 more years, it didn't compute that I should do that because home life was so rough. So instead what I did was I packed my bags and ran away from home, and I hitchhiked all the way down to Southern California and essentially learned how to live homeless on the street, thinking anything would be better than what I grew up in. But what ends up happening, and this is part of the story and the work that I do with others, is if you don't heal whatever you've been through, you tend to, statistically, you might go into the same scenario or it might come into your life, even if you don't want it to. And that's what happened. I ended up meeting a gentleman who was, well, he wasn't a gentleman, but he was literally twice my age, and got in a relationship, ended up, getting married, having children, but he turned out to be very similar as far as the addiction, to methamphetamines and being very abusive and things like that. And so I was in that relationship from basically 15 to 25.
Wow.
And when I recognized that my children were now showing the same signs and symptoms that I had, I realized history had repeated itself. And that's when I was determined. I started asking myself, how on earth did this happen? I left home, I had a good intention, but I did not change the cycle. The cycle repeated. So I was determined to break that cycle. And now, my daughters are grown, they have their own families, and now there's grandchildren, and now I'm seeing the fruits of that labor.
Wow.
Where that cycle is not repeating itself. They're married to good men. And
that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. The stories that you told and your perspective in the book were captivating. And I feel like it really made me wonder how many other situations in some sense, I was listening and I felt like it was hard to believe that, all of these things could happen to a person. But then I think the more that I actually pay attention and am aware to the world around me, I realize that they're more common than not. Maybe not more common than not, but they're quite common.
They are quite common.
And part of what you're doing right now is to help other people in similar situations. So do you see these sorts of behaviors within families and in this trauma in people's life? Do you see it pretty often?
I do see it quite often, actually.
Okay.
So whether somebody has an official diagnosis or not, it could be whether you've perceived it as trauma, you perceive it as an adverse life experience. It's anything that was too much for your mind and heart to handle. So then a disconnect happens. So the idea is, how do you go and you heal that disconnected part of you so that you can come back into like an integration with yourself and become more whole?
Wow.
Yeah, but it is very common.
Yeah. So from the point I kind of took off running with that, but from the time you were 25 and you started noticing and you started changing that trajectory in your own life. So you fast forward now to where you said you have got your own children and now grandchildren.
Right.
What are some of the things that you look at now that were like key elements of transformation that you changed in your own life and that you were able to, use in your family life?
I would say the key ingredients are you need courage, you need commitment, because incredible change has to happen, and it's not easy. So it took an immense amount of courage and very strategic thinking to be able to leave the abusive marriage that I was in. And it was actually Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that really inspired a different way of thinking for me. And It was all about self-mastery. And this idea of self-mastery has just been with me the whole time. And so I'm continually working on anywhere there's dysfunction within myself, my own thinking, I'm trying to look within. Are the thoughts that I'm having, are the behaviors that I'm noticing, are they true? How do I know for certain they're true? Who would I be if I didn't have this thought? Who would I be if I didn't have this reaction to this? Because I did not like what I had come from, and I had clearly adopted very dysfunctional thinking out of a survival situation. But those survival techniques, they only work when you're in a really bad situation. They don't work in healthy relationships.
Okay.
In fact, they will harm healthy relationships.
Okay, that's interesting.
Being able to notice, okay, you have this skill, you can use it for this, but you cannot use it in a healthy situation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. So if we were to take a snapshot of, like, say, a week or a month of your life right now, like, how are you using these things that you have developed and discovered, or not discovered, but that you've been working on in your everyday practice? Like, you're getting ready to go on a trip where you're going to be speaking. I think you said that before we started recording. But tell me, what are the things that you're doing now? You're an author of a book. What else are you doing?
So I've been a practitioner of Goodbye Tension for the last 19 years, and I focus on tension relief physically, mentally, emotionally, and digestively. So it looks at the person as a whole, not compartmentalized. I'm getting ready to leave for a conference, the National Ayurvedic Medical Association, which is where I'm currently finishing up my doctorate, where I was asked to speak on the ADHERE process that I created. So ADHERE, it's an acronym for Explore, Discover, Heal, Integrate, and Relate. And those are the 5 steps on how to do the inner work. So the first step, you need to have courage to explore your own behavior, your own thoughts, what's coming up for you now. It could just be you're continually having anxiety, could be depression, anything that's needs to be explored more, basically. Then whatever you discover, and that could be you realize there's something in your past you didn't digest very well mentally or emotionally. That's where it gets a little bit more challenging, because we may not like what we see. But the only way change can happen is you have to be willing to see it. So once you discover what it is, then you can heal it. So like I referenced in my book, there was an aspect of me that was like 3-4 years old, and I needed to go in and heal her. A disconnect happened within my mind-body system as a way of surviving, trauma. And so by the time I, did some visualization and exploring of this part of myself, what I saw, which is all, generated into my psyche, that doesn't mean the story of it, it's true. It's just that's how it developed. And so when I saw this version of myself, she needed to be loved, taken care of, nurtured, promised that there would be no abandonment, no more abuse, things like that. And so that's what I work on with others, is developing this larger or higher self aspect that can give you everything that you need. Go in and heal that part of you. And then once that inner child, so to speak, trusts you and the healing has happened, then you can integrate and become one. Now there's more of you available. And then the final step, relate, is you have more of you available, but you're not used to it yet. So you need time to figure out, well, who am I now? The people around you will need time to acclimate as well. And sometimes, the changes are very subtle, and sometimes they're drastic. And I do this honestly on a daily basis. The moment I notice something, whether I'm walking and I'm like, oh, I'm totally judging that person. Well, my judgment of somebody has everything to do with me. It has nothing to do with the person. But that person is a catalyst. They're giving me an opportunity to look at something.
Right. Yeah. I was listening. One of the most recent things that came to my mind that from what you're just saying now is this idea of trigger points. And I think I was recently, it just popped into my mind. You were saying that trigger points are one of those things that you didn't like.
Yeah,
but then
triggers.
I think the triggers. But then what sticks in my mind is, it was fascinating, is how you were saying actually triggers are now something you kind of look forward to, or at least you
Most
embrace.
of the
time. Maybe you embrace. I think basically just because you were saying that it gives you an opportunity to figure out how to navigate through this new challenge, or this new trouble point in your life. Is that right?
Well, a trigger is it's already there within you. Something outside of you has activated it. Now, the normal response is that you blame the person or whatever the instance is that's triggering you. But the reality is it's already there. It just got activated.
Yeah.
So if it's already there, you could avoid it, and then it just festers and grows, or you could turn around and have courage and commitment to look at it. And that means you need to be willing to see. You're afraid, you're sad, you're angry, but those experiences cannot change unless you're willing to look at them.
That's
and I don't think you actually have to relive the trauma either. It's just whatever it's bringing up, that's what needs to be looked at. We don't need to be diving into, here, tell me the whole story. It's not necessary. In fact, I think oftentimes that's more traumatic.
We will continue the rest of our conversation in just a moment, but really quickly, I wanted just to tell you about the giveaway. If you are interested in a session with Jeannine, if you're interested in her book, the workbook, connecting with her, then go to our Instagram, the Fremont Podcast, and follow us. Look for the information there. It'll be a big help for you. Now back to our conversation. I'm thinking as you're talking about this, and I know, having gone through your book and hearing your story, it made me sad in places, made me angry, made me very, very compassionate in some ways, just because it just seemed like just a horrible situation. But I started thinking also about the fact that we just went through 2 years of COVID, and I think for a lot of people, and I don't want to necessarily say that, what COVID has brought to us has, is equal to the kind of trauma that you went through the first 25 years of your life. But I will say that I think that it has its own sense and its own form of trauma that I think, that people could be dealing with because of the last 2 years. I mean, would you agree with that? And if so, what are some of your thoughts around how people might process their experiences, their traumatic experience because of COVID the last couple of years?
I definitely feel that COVID is a traumatic experience. Some people don't like the word trauma, so you could say adverse life experience. Basically, in a moment, our lives changed. And we were in lockdown and forced to be with ourselves, forced to be with whoever we were living with, being with people more than we had ever been, in some cases, not being able to go to our jobs. So all of it could be considered like a defense mechanism or an outlet of getting some space, whether from yourself or other, was not available because we were all at home. So anything that we had been pushing down psychologically, mentally, and emotionally had an opportunity to come up, but most people probably didn't see it as an opportunity. So in that case, I would definitely say COVID was a catalyst in many ways. It gave us an opportunity to look at our lives differently, but it was also very traumatic. But trauma also can be, it is life-changing. It depends on how you digest it and experience it. I'm not saying that those who intentionally create trauma for others should be excused. What I'm saying is, whatever your situation, it is how you relate with it. So it still comes down to the relationship that you have with yourself. So for those of us who are in lockdown and in situations that we really didn't like, it was an opportunity to re-examine. Are there things that you need to look at so that you can relate better with your situation? Do you need to switch jobs, and this, that, and the other?
Wow. Yeah, I think these are some really important things for us to think through and consider. I also think that it's possible that people could be dealing with a lot of extra stress right now in their own lives and not even, I think kind of what you said at the beginning, we might be afraid to call it trauma, or we just maybe in denial to a certain degree, where we're just like, I haven't gone through anything. Why would I be feeling this way? And I think that, it's helpful to be honest, or at least be able to have that place in our mind where we say, I could be dealing with, this particular type of trauma and so on. So
yeah, many of my clients, some of them have specific trauma, while others are like, I just don't feel quite in alignment. It's this sense that something's not quite right. That's an adversity within your own system. That's what we need to look at.
Wow. So I was just thinking of this. You were saying that one of the things that brought you to Fremont at the very beginning was just kind of like maybe the coziness and the affordability, at least, of being able to find this area, the coziness of Niles or whatever. So I'm curious. I'm not going to pretend to be a practitioner or a doctor or anything, but I'm going to say that I think sometimes environment can provide both a catalyst toward trauma, but it can also provide a catalyst toward stress relief, I guess, if you would say that, or a place of peace to be able to allow us to be able to have the right sort of processes going on. Are there places in Fremont, since this is the Fremont podcast, are there places in Fremont that you go to or that you know are very special to you that you would say, yeah, at a time when I need to, deal with something in my life, this is where I go, or this is what I really love, or this is a healing place for me?
I would definitely say Quarry Lakes. So when I wrote my book, actually a majority of it, I spoke it and then had it transcribed because there was some sort of mental block around either writing or typing. And I actually do a lot of my best creative work on a walk by myself. And I'll have like headphones in and just be speaking and have it just transcribing. And then I will go back and I'll look at my notes.
Wow.
When it comes to like processing, if it's something intense, I will video myself and have that dialogue and then go back and look and notice, wow, she's experiencing this. I see the scared version of this aspect of me, but it gives me a different perspective, but it also gives me an outlet.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you basically authored at least part of your book walking around Quarry Lakes.
Yep.
That's great. That's great. Is there any other place in Fremont that you really love, or something that's a place of comfort for you?
I do like Coyote Creek.
Okay.
Lake Elizabeth is good, but sometimes there's just a lot of people. So I like Quarry Lakes because you can find little facets where it's just you.
Yeah.
So you can have that with Coyote Creek as well. Niles is great, depending on if you want a big crowd or you don't. It will depend on the day. And oftentimes I'll walk these back streets, of Niles, and just enjoy like the scenery and the beautiful trees and houses.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what is the trajectory for you now? You are immediately going to speak at this conference, but then what's in the near and distant future for you now?
So I'm just finishing up my doctorate, writing my dissertation, where I'm going to present the process, the ADHERE process, and show how that will help those who are suffering from PTSD. So my doctorate is in Ayurveda, which is the ancient medicine that comes from India.
Okay.
And that's also the conference I'm speaking at. And then once that's completed, or it's actually, kind of manifesting itself, is creating an online platform and trainings and workshops so that other people can learn how to do this work with whatever practice they're already in.
Wow.
So they could be doctors, they could be therapists, you could want to learn it on your own. That will be the next phase.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. If people are interested in actually reaching out to you about trauma that they've experienced, can they do that?
They can, actually. You can go to goodbyetension.com.
Okay.
And you can find, a copy of my book there and all of my information, phone number, email, all
awesome.
of that. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And you are a regularly practicing clinician, I guess,
yes.
as well. So,
yeah.
So they can
and I do
you
sessions online or in office. In office would be in Santa Clara, but I have many clients who are around the world now, so I can do it online as well. And if you're here in Fremont, we can also figure out, a place to meet. We could meet in a park, something
nice.
like that. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Jeannine, thank you so much for your work, the taking your story and being willing to share it with with the world, really. And thank you for your time here. I didn't realize that when we met standing in line getting coffee one day that I'd have the opportunity and the privilege of having this conversation with you and having this little window into your life. So I really appreciate you and appreciate the opportunity that you've taken to be on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ricky.
You've been listening to the Fremont Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever it is that you listen so you don't miss an episode. And if you're so inclined, leave a kind review so that others can find the podcast. To stay connected with us, you can find links to our social media and other content at thefremontpodcast.com. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by Ricky B. Music provided through Soundstripe.com. I'm Gary Williams. Join us next week on the Fremont Podcast.
Muggins Media.